experienced maybe the most dramatic nightmare they had in mind. And they went up. The final destination was U.S., of course. I don't know how many of them crossed the line or how many of them were returned. The thing is that we have now the same situation on the opposite direction, but with very much less Venezuelan. Still, the 90% of the people coming north-south are Venezuelan, but we are dealing with 200-something per month. And we immediately take them, move to the Atlantic side of Panama in the border of Colombia, and move them to Colombia by boat or by plane through a process that we have of immigration return for foreigners.
And we will address this immigration crisis and the effect it's had in the region and, of course, in the relationship with the United States more in depth. But I want to ask Neri Woods about how Latin Americans should interpret this moment, especially in an increasingly contested global order.
Yeah, so, well, as Dean of a School of Government, I see leaders from 65 or so different countries in the school each year. And sometimes they debate who's got the worst leader. And Zimbabwe will say, well, ours, and Venezuela will say, well, ours, etc., right? And it poses the question, if another country has a bad leader, why not remove them? Well, who to remove them? And for 100 years, there's been norms about not removing other countries' leaders. We don't have time to go into those norms, but I just do want to pick up on something the President just said, which is the record of one country removing another country's leader simply because they can is not great. In Panama, in Haiti, in Iraq, let's not forget the US said we're coming to liberate you, in Libya, that it's not enough simply to make one leader disappear. The world keeps imagining that nothing could be worse than the leader that they've got, and then finding to their horror that things can actually get worse, which is why a principle of not doing this has long been with us, because it's not about getting rid of the one person. It's about what do you do with the institutions? What do you do with the people? What do you do with their aspirations afterwards? Do you go as an occupying force and spend 10 years trying to rebuild? Do you bring the whole of the international community together to make them a sort of annexed territory of a global community? It's really difficult. And there are other options to going in and capturing a leader and removing them. There are other ways that an international community can support people to end up with a government that is their choice. And so I think when it comes to Venezuela and Latin America, we need to think, well, what happened to those other means of supporting Venezuelans to ensure that the person they elected to be president would be elected? And what's the difference between saying this is a judicial exfiltration, we're just taking this person to put them on trial in the United States, and saying we are now governing Venezuela. We are now in charge of Venezuela. You know, big responsibility. We'll see how that goes.
And Venezuelan resources as well. I see a theme emerging in our discussion, Ian, and it's not exclusive to the rooms of the World Economic Forum. I think it's part of what we've seen in the last few weeks in this conversation about the region. A necessary response to a regional disorder, this intervention, or something that undermines sovereignty, multilateralism, and long-term trust, which is the essential concept of our conversation. How do you see it?
Well, we are in the business of trying to improve the lives of people in the region. That's our region. We do it in moments where we believe that the market cannot do it by itself, so that we have some additionality. And in the moments of change, moments where we see that there are conditions for a sustainable recovery, we do intervene, use the resources to do so. And yes, that's part of regaining trust, because I think multilateral institutions have the ability to bring trust to types of economic intervention. But you need the conditions to do so. And some of them are more practical conditions. So for example, in the case of Venezuela, you need to have legitimate by our boards to engage. We need to have approval. We have 48 members of our board, so we need approval of the members. We need to be in relationship, economic relationship, which we don't have at this point with Venezuela for other reasons. But there are other conditions which are you need to intervene when you believe that there is a possibility of sustainable recovery, when the investment can look at the long term and believe it's a moment to enter and to have investments for the future. And that's what we're looking. In the meantime, we are an institution, the IDB. We have been following Venezuela for decades, and we continue to do so, even these years. So for example, the data most used are the data that we provide by our proprietary service, social and macroeconomic, and we have been following Venezuela in the best way we can, and we're preparing ourselves for when and if the conditions arise.
Do you know something? Let me ask just one thing.
Absolutely.
We have regional institutions in Latin America, OAS mainly.
Yes.
Some others in the United Nations. But the problem is that when you go to exercise your right as a country to the OAS, for example, they are very weak, to say the least. They are very weak, and they do nothing. They do nothing. We suffered that in Panama. We exercised all the possibilities to get out of the crisis. Venezuela, I don't know how much they did, but the problem is when you discuss in the OAS and try to adopt a resolution condemning, not saying more than condemning, immediately 1, 2, 3 countries exercise the lack of consensus, which is the opposite side of a veto, right? No, I am not in the consensus. I am vetoing the resolution. So the inefficiency of our organizations in the region, that doesn't resolve a crisis.
I think it's a crisis that extends beyond the region to global multilateral institutions. I was saying at the beginning that there's two components to democracy, right? The legitimacy, elections, and all the values and principles of a liberal democracy, but then there's performance and results. And at the heart of that, President Noboa, is security. You've had that experience in Ecuador. How's that trade-off between acting fast, acting decisively, and making sure that you're preserving the democratic norms?
Well, it's always difficult when you're at war, and we're at war. We're at war against narco-terrorism. If you add up the amount of fighters, say from the 3 largest, they're not gangs anymore, they are transnational narco-terrorist groups. We are today above 60,000 armed men and women. And it's very difficult to fight this in a traditional way, almost impossible. Also because throughout time, these criminal organizations have adapted to our system. In the case of Ecuador, we have a constitution that gives a lot of guarantees to citizens. So they adapt. They know exactly what to do. They know exactly how to get caught. They know how to present an habeas corpus. They know how to play the game. So by using all the democratic, let's say, ways, rules, they know how to play them better. That's the reality. We're fighting a war that is not only on the street. It's a war that is in courts, is a war that is in the media, is a war that is in social media also, it's a complete war against evil and narco-terrorism. That's why the only indicator that we see now, and that I tell my team that we should see, is the poverty index. Not GDP growth, not anything else. So we see the poverty index. Why? Because in a ways we're taking people out of poverty, out of the hands of these narco-terrorist groups, and we're giving them a chance to live a regular life. Ecuador right now, poverty index is at 21.4. It's the lowest poverty index rate in the history of the country. And for me, it's the only number that matters. But there's a fine line between protecting people and protecting the rights of people. Protecting the rights of the majority of people or protecting the rights of the minority that wants to destabilize. It's a question that we ask ourselves every single day, that we have to fight every day to keep that balance. If we break that balance, then we would not be any better than Maduro.
And Nair Woods, this situation where emergency measures seem more permanent, not just in Ecuador, but in other parts of the hemisphere, this erosion of trust in the capacity of the state to intervene in a way that really moves the needle and makes a difference in people's lives. Do you think that's the primary failure of democracy in Latin America?
Yeah, I think we're living in a moment where leaders across the world are making choices between policies of coercion and policies of co-option and accommodation. And coercion is tempting. It's tempting in the face of some of the atrocities that narco-terrorists deploy. It's tempting when you think you're up against evil forces. But the problem for any society is that if you make enemies of the people within your society, where does that take you? What is the future? Do you simply try to extinguish a whole group of people? Or are you actually trying to build a society that in the end can live together? And we've seen this all over. You know, under colonial rule, you saw Britain trying to do it by coercion in Kenya, in India, etc. You saw it in Northern Ireland for years, a terrible civil war, because each side felt that they were fighting evil on the other. And we've seen it in Colombia, in Latin America. We've seen 3 different approaches to internal, some would say, terrorism, to internal groups that pose a security threat and risk both to the state and to other citizens. But my observation, looking right across the world, is that each of the situations that's been resolved has ended up having to be resolved through dialogue. Dialogue doesn't mean embracing narco-terrorists, but it does mean thinking about how you deal with adversaries without making them into perpetual enemies. It does mean look at the experience of other countries in finding a way to build to a future together. Because in the end, a society that is in a perpetual civil war is never going to be secure for anybody, not for its citizens, not for its government, not for its international investors. And so, in Northern Ireland, it endured decades before people came together and had the courage to create a process for actually talking through what it would take to live side by side and not live in fear of terror every day.
Let me change the tone a little bit before we go to our audience for questions, because Latin America seems to be back at the center of global geopolitics, and it's not because of its internal challenges, which we've already covered some of them, but because the world increasingly needs or depends on the region for its resources, migration control, and policy alignment. So, Ian, in terms of the opportunity there, a world that is more dependent of Latin American resources, of Latin American stability, political alignment. What does that mean for the region, for the region's future?
Well, it is definitely we are seeing more attention to the hemisphere, to the region, and this is a double sword because at the same time there is a lot of challenges and geopolitical issues that come to the forum, but there's also opportunities. And our challenge together is to use these challenges and enhance the opportunities. You mentioned critical minerals. Definitely, if the world is looking for safe supply chains, to diversify them, and the region is responsible for at least 1/3 of the minerals of the world, this is the place where we can embrace and be part of the global economy in a constructive way. And the way to do it is, of course, bringing value, bringing investment, bringing processing, try to bring more job creation with this opportunity. There are other opportunities. Energy supply, also very important coming from the region. Security, we are part of which this discussion of security is very important. This is about organized crime. It is not about just one country. It's not about only Ecuador, Panama. It is across the region. One thing that surprised me the most when I got to the job was that the development bank will do security. We cannot hire police or military, but we created the Alliance for Security because every other president in the region, independent of the political side, will tell us for development, we need to deal with security. So the Alliance is against the organized crime, is about organizing ourselves, is about exchanging information. For example, one result of the alliance is exchanging criminal records that we didn't have. When one criminal crossed the border, we didn't exchange it. So now we are doing it. Or we're using technology to use Brazilian, for example, looking at illegal mining in the Amazon and do it in the rest. Things like that, we need to start using intelligence. Why is it a regional opportunity? Because part of the organized crime and the narco traffic is part of the region, and it's an opportunity for us to embrace it and to try to do it in a constructive way through dealing with social, as the President Noboa mentioned, dealing with the institution, giving them the support where the state can be present, and finally, dealing with the legal transfer of money that we can try to work with.
Ian was mentioning, President Mulino, the political spectrum, the ideological spectrum in Latin America, how it has shifted from a more leftist governments in Latin America to a mix of conservative and leftist governments. How do you see that in terms of the global cooperation that it's needed in the hemisphere, given everything that we're seeing in the world right now?
I think that the financial institutions are working better than years ago. And they are putting in the balance whether I'm going to help a dictator or I'm going to use those funds to help the development of a democratic nation. I think that is a key element. Because at the end, for example, we are fighting in Panama because we inherited the former government and indebted the government the double. Panama has a public debt of $56 $56,000 million US dollar. That's enormous for a country like us.
$56 billion.
Billions, yes.
Okay.
It's enormous. I have with me the Minister of Finance. I have been a hero in a very dramatic year, trying to balance, to put fiscal controls, to reduce the level of deficit 3.5 points, from 7.35 to close to 4. So it's important to make the government function, not only in terms of politics that consume a lot of time, but at the very end, democracy is discussion, is a wide variety of opinions that you have to listen to, but also to conduct a nation. I think, Ian, one of the problems that we are facing in the region is education. I'm entering in a process of transforming the law of education in Panama that was enacted in 1946. And no one has dared to enter into that process. I did it. And I hope that more or less March, April, we will have a draft to go to the Congress or to the Assembly. That's important. Investing in education is a one generation period of time that you have to wait.
Yeah, especially at a time where technology is impacting.
Because at this moment in Panama, those kids or students who has the chance not have to be rich people. Many, the majority of them, the fathers are making a big effort to send the children to private school. It doesn't mean that you are rich. No. But the majority in the public schools face a gap, a big gap between one another, big gap. And that brings, in the medium and long run, a lot of stability. Because there will be students that say, what do you have for me? Opportunities? I don't see any. And they are the one who goes for the easy life with a lot of money. Short life, but a lot of money, narco traffic.
Yeah, and it's tied to what President Noboa was
saying.
Exactly. Combating poverty, investing in education.
And we have to face that. I think the Panama and Ecuador are facing a problem with narco traffic. We just finished 2025 with an enormous amount of drug seized. 155 metric tons. That's a lot of cocaine.
That's a
lot of cocaine.
And a lot of resources for those criminal organizations.
One single ship, 13.5 tons in one ship. So that funds, part of those funds, enter the society.
Yeah. Through the, I don't know if you want to say something, but if you don't mind, let me open the floor for questions because we only have a few minutes left, and I do want the audience to have the opportunity. Housekeeping item, because this session is being televised, I'm going to ask you to stand up. Once I point to you and you have a microphone, brief introduction and brief questions so we can get to as many as possible here in our audience. So please go ahead over here. If you can please stand up and introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity and your words. My name is Camila. I'm from Caracas, Venezuela, and I'm an economist. I'm also a global shaper, and I'm here with the World Economic Forum. Throughout my life, I've been fascinated by the way that money moves across the region, and I've worked from humanitarian aid to private equity. The discourse for the Venezuelan situation right now, or at least the economic argument, is that the new inflow of money and investment will result in the benefit and positive outcomes for the Venezuelan people. My question is that this new inflow of money could actually disrupt the way the money moves in the region. And I wanted to know if there is a possibility of regional alignment for the priorities of this investment. And if there is not a possibility of alignment so far, how can we make that happen?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Camila. Appreciate it. Thank you. Over here. Ian, I don't know if you want to tackle that, Nair.
I don't think there is a regional discussion about where the flows to Venezuela are going. I think that we are in a moment of still a political environment to be resolved. I believe that there will be a moment where we will need to have a very important discussion about whether resources should be allocated. Multilateral development banks and others, IMF and others, should be a discussion. And at that moment, it will be very important to have alignment in the region and alignment between several of the members of where the resources have the most potential. What I can say is that everybody is being prepared for that moment to see where you need more of the resources, and not only the resources, but also the policies. Sometimes the policies are as important than the resources. Rules, changes, institutions, those are very, very important.
And
Yes.
I agree. Look, the natural resources across Latin America give me huge optimism for the continent. It's got extraordinary resources, extraordinary talent. It's also got, over the last few decades, people who have fought really hard for democracy and for democratic governance, which has given lots of countries on the continent real security. It's also got, as the President mentioned, habits of cooperation on the nuclear treaty in Southern America, the CAF in the north. So all of this is reasons for being optimistic. But now every country on the continent is facing a competition between outside powers, the US, China, for control. And to me, the most important thing, whether it's for Venezuela or its neighbors, is that each country and collectively the continent has a clear strategy of its own, that it doesn't end up simply bandwagoning with the United States or China, becoming the just convenient backseat passenger, but rather has a strategy for its own people and for the region itself. And I think that's what I would be looking for Venezuela. I sit on the board of a mining company. You can't, as a publicly listed company, make multi-billion-dollar investments in a country whose political system is obscure or insecure. You just can't. Your shareholders won't buy it because you'll risk being expropriated just after you've dropped your first few billion, right? So there's a lot more work to do to make the promise of investments in Venezuela investments which pay off for all of the Venezuelan people and don't either fall into great power rivalry or into rent-seeking and resource curse.
And that great power rivalry is playing out as we speak today. We'll see Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, speaking here at the forum just days after normalizing the relation with China. And I don't have to tell the presidents here about those tensions. They live with them every day. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Venancio Mendez, also with Venezuela. Just posing an interesting challenge on the perspective of international law. And my question is, what happens when international law is meant to protect those that are being tortured or killed? What happens when those mechanisms fail? Then the ultimate result is what we saw on January the 3rd. So it's a question for us to think about this. And the second part of the question is, we as Latin Americans, we have infinite resources, talent, we have incredible geography. We hear Emmanuel Macron and the Europeans talking about their own strengths. We hear China on the AI battle with the US. How can we as Latin Americans come together on the topic of cooperation and dialogue? And what are your thoughts specifically on, the rest of the world is talking about AI and energy. How can we have our own conversations of strength and growth? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. This is a fascinating question, President Noboa, because I think you touched on this a little bit at the beginning. I was just listening to another conversation here at Davos about the role shame and pride have in politics. And a lot of the conversation around Latin America comes from a place of shame and not pride. What do you think about that?
Yeah, first, I think that the whole discussion about ideology has to be eliminated. I mean, the real enemy is misery. And the real enemy is having impoverished nations that have billions and billions of dollars, trillions of dollars in resources, and still can't have 3 meals a day. So instead of ideology, we should focus on tackling misery. The fight in Latin America is not territorial, it's not religious, it's not even culturally. It's democracy versus anarchy. So it's different than what happened in Ireland. It's different from what's happened in the Middle East. It's organized crime taking over and replacing a state, or replacing, you know, the protector figure to its people. So first, we need to eliminate the ideology discussion. Second of all, we need alignment. Alignment in key issues: reduce poverty, fight narco-terrorism, and also in controls. What do I mean in controls? There's going to be a lot of shifts in the movement of money through our nations. For example, in Ecuador, there were political campaigns that were financed by Maduro's regime. There was money funneled through PDVSA to certain political parties. Same thing happened with Podemos in Spain. Same thing happened in Colombia. So the whole structure is going to shift. And we need to use those resources to benefit people. Then be aligned also in controlling that money, the flow of dirty money, and today, dirty gold. The multiple in gold at today's price, which reached 4,725, using mercury, which is illegal, but illegal miners use it, the multiple is very similar to cocaine. So even narcos are adapting. They say, you know what? If they catch me with a kilo of cocaine in a highway, I'm going to jail straight. If they find me with a couple of kilos
of mercury?
No, of gold. They'll applaud me, probably. So they're shifting. The criminal structures are shifting. Now it's not only drugs. Now it's drugs. It's illegal mining. It's human trafficking. And we need to work on the basic things that we all agree, eliminate the ideology discussion, and understand that we're very similar in Latin America. We just need to fight the right fight together.
Ian, you were nodding, so I know you want to say something.
I think the end of the question is very important. What can we do? It's a very polarized world today. I think we need to start with our own institutions, with our own families, bringing this dialogue. And in a lot of our own world, we can start building this consensus. Let me give you an example of this year of our organization. We have 48 members, each one thinking differently. It's a polarized world. But we wanted to concentrate on common interest, what unites us, instead of concentrating on what does not unite us. We concentrate on security, which we just mentioned. Everybody. We concentrate on how private sector could help us lead for development. We concentrated on how to deal with natural disasters, which everybody was facing. And we concentrated on what President Noboa just mentioned about efficiency, which is not an ideology, dealing with what we need to do by evidence. So those four were the basics of what we concentrated this year. And at the end was a very good result for the year. We went together, we had a record year of projects and efficiency and impact because we wanted to concentrate on issues that unite us with more dialogue. Will this change the world? I don't know, but it's a good start from our institutions, from bottom to up.
Okay. We're out of time. We have less than 2 minutes. I do want to have a closing round and ask you a very concrete question in order to make that efficient. In a year from now, if we're here in Davos again, or we see each other in Ecuador or in Panama, at Oxford University, in Washington, D.C., what would be the single institutional reform, the policy outcome that could tangibly help rebuild trust in Latin America? I'll start with President Mulino. Is it education, as you were saying? Is it government efficiency through innovation and technology? What do you think is the single outcome in terms of policy, institutional reform that can tangibly help rebuild trust in Latin America?
Education, number one, in the long term, not right away. It takes 25 years to, if everything goes okay. I think another mission to fulfill what you're saying is to reduce the level of expenses of the government in a useless manner. We need to invest. We need to produce employment. We have to make our country safe, precisely for what you say. How can you invest in a country with completely unstable? It doesn't go together. So I think that governments and we that are leading our countries have to be very conscious and address the funds, the public funds, to the areas in which we can help the people in a very integral way. It's not making politics with public funds. That's the most easy way of doing politics. Taking money and giving to the people. That's not the way I'm doing. Investing the public budgets needs to have a good component of investment in social things, social areas. I think that brings stability. We have to recover our credibility. The politicians are very low in credibility for many reasons. So we have to regain the credibility of the people that we are doing what we are doing for them, not for me, for them.
So I'll take education in the long term, but in a year, if we meet again, it would be responsible spending. The finance minister was, I think, rolling his eyes a little bit, so it's up to him in many ways. President Noboa.
Youth occupation.
Youth occupation.
We need to check on the tornado chart of our population. South America is very young. In the case of Ecuador, 40% of the people are between 14 and 35. So is again, look at the population, of policy for that population. Easier access to jobs, technical schools, trade schools, and of course, education. But it's not as simple as that. Is to follow up and to help that young man or woman to find a better life. It's not only give them the education, find them a job, find them meaning, help them find meaning for themselves, and give them hope. Give them hope that they're going to live as well or better than their parents.
It goes back to the shame and pride equation that we were talking about. Nair Woods.
I agree with President Noboa. The most important is that governments actually set out a strategy, a vision that gives their citizens hope. In too many countries, politicians are saying, we've got to manage the mess that our predecessors made, we've got to manage our international relations with the superpowers, and they're failing to set out a strategy of where the country can go that actually gives their young people hope and a sense that they'll have a future. I also wanted to pick up on President Noboa's point about illicit flows, because that will crucify the ability to do a strategy. And the single most important thing for me is crypto. Because I sat here in Davos last year listening to security chiefs and financial controllers talking about, as the global economy goes crypto, governments, regulators, integrity organizations lose all control of illicit funding. And I think that's something that we should come back to next year.
Absolutely. 30 seconds here.
So let me concentrate on the regional aspect, because I agree with education, it is from a regional perspective. In a year, if we have agreements like the EU-Mercosur that has actually started to implement, if I see the region having more agreements between Central America or between North and Central or South connection, if I see more of that actually being implemented, I think it's a good step forward.
Wonderful job in doing it in 25 seconds. Thank you so much. This year's theme in Davos is the spirit of dialogue, and I think we see that as an aspiration, and the only way that we can make that happen is through conversations that matter. I really hope this conversation mattered to you and it was of your interest. I appreciate President Noboa, President Mulino, Nair Woods, and Ian Goldschmidt for their time and for their incredible insights. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.